Слава Україні!
Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that you've had a wonderful last couple of days, and I hope that you, your friends, and your family are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's been a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 48 hours since we last did a report here on the new news. A lot of stuff happening in Ukraine and throughout the world, the Middle East, what have you. And there's going to, of course, be a ton when we stream next. And speaking of our next stream, we will be taking another pause, of course, for us to be able to celebrate the holiday, spend time with family and what have you, as I hope that the many of you guys are as well. And so we will not be streaming. This will be the last stream of the year. We will not be streaming again until Wednesday, the 4th of January. So next week's, so Wednesday of next week. So I hope that you guys are able to take this time, spend time with friends and family and everyone else that you may care about, and be able to get some relaxation in. I hope that you guys have plenty of time off. But in the meantime, we'll come back and, of course, do a review, as we have, of everything that has happened up until that point. So hopefully everything is going relatively well when we come back. Now, there's been, of course, a lot of developments, and a lot of the developments, generally speaking, are not very good. A lot of this stuff that makes the news, the top headlines, stuff coming out from around the world, generally speaking, is stuff that is not necessarily inherently good. It's a lot of conflict. It's a lot of people suffering throughout the world. And here at the New News, the whole point of this project, since we started this clear back in March, is to go through and try and do as much good as possible while keeping you as the audience informed. And so we have always pledged and always will pledge to be the news that gives back. We will never be monetizing this for any personal gain. We'll never be doing any kind of super chats. We're never going to push any merchandising. 100% of everything we do here at the New News is charity driven. Everything here is going to try and help people. So please, if you check out the video description below, you're going to see a ton of different organizations down there, all of which have gone through and been vetted by us. And many of them have been actually advertised by you guys. You guys have actually sent those over to us for us to go through and vet. I thank you, and please keep those coming. You can always reach a staff member on our Discord or from our official emails as posted on our website, and we will go through the vetting process on those and try and get as many added to the stream. 70% of all the donations these organizations receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people, with 30% or less actually going to those salaries and administrations costs that make a lot of organizations, especially some bigger ones, relatively controversial. So our goal here is to help people, not to put a bunch of money in someone's pocket. So please be sure to check out all of those organizations. They cover everything from the war in Ukraine, both military and humanitarian support, as well as many other locations throughout the globe: Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia, and many, many others. And once again, keep those coming. A lot of good has been done with these organizations, and we hope to continue to support them long and far into the future. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do for us here at the New News is to help us grow our impact and grow this community. The more people that become part of this community, the more people that watch this become informed and have an opportunity to, or able to give back, and we'll be able to have a much bigger impact and help a lot more people throughout the world through this project. We want to help as many people as possible. According to the World Food Program director earlier this year, he stated that 345 million people are currently marching towards starvation. It's one of the highest refugee numbers and numbers of internally displaced people in recorded human history. So there is a lot to be done and a lot that we hope to accomplish. And with that, we get ready to move into the news, but not before I address some things. So if you are in the live chat tonight, if you're watching this live with us tonight, please feel free to ask questions. I can answer, especially when it comes to the conflicts, I can answer a wide variety of questions with that. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, if you are new here, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020 as an O-352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, serving with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour to the Middle East between October of 2017 and March of 2018 was to the country of Syria. I spent 4.5 months in the country of Syria providing convoy escorts, assisting with the fight against against the Islamic State as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, operating with special operations forces within the country and coalition partners, as well as being embedded with the Syrian Democratic Forces there. And then I also, of course, was working with stabilization efforts and deconfliction with the Russian forces there inside of Syria, as well as pro-Assad regime forces. My second tour to the Middle East I did between October of 2019 and March of 2020, where I served as the Javelin team leader of the crisis response company out of Kuwait. During the New Year's attack on the U.S. Embassy in 2020, I actually responded to the embassy as one of the 100 Marines to land there, where I oversaw anti-armor operations across the entire Baghdad embassy complex throughout the duration of my time, about a month and a half, after which I went down to Saudi Arabia and trained Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to deploy into Yemen as part of the Saudi coalition fighting the Houthi rebels there. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armor doctrine, as well as a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, and a combat lifesaver certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what most Marines would receive. I'm also very interested and try to remain well-rounded in things I will never claim to be an expert in, including human geography, geopolitics, and many other different topics throughout my interests throughout the world. So please feel free to ask questions. I will answer them to the best of my ability. I will just say so if I was unable to answer your question, if I just do not have the knowledge for it. And hopefully we'll be able to broaden your understanding of everything here. So we'll see what happens with that. But with that, we jump right into the news here, and we jump right down here into the country of Ukraine. And we actually start off here on the very western side of Ukraine, where we go over, this is in the Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast, where a local woman who's actually inside of her house with her child actually had a Russian cruise missile embed itself into the house. While they were there, they were sheltering there inside of the home during a very large missile strike, which we'll get here more into here in a second. But the missile did not detonate, but it did ended up punching a hole right through the side of the house and directly into the kitchen. We see this coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, who posted this photo coming from their kitchen. Definitely not a way to start your day. I do not consider that to be a healthy breakfast. And coming from Anton Jaroshenko, who also posted about this. This is a video that was released that he posted by this coming from Suspilene.
Коридор залетіло, я взяла дитину, вийшла на двір і пішла. Мене не зачепило, лише я сильно всі напорила. Я не знала, що це є.
Чую, лише трух, бух, гримнуло так, що. І бачу, що нічого немає. Я блехчу до вікна, а то якраз мені вискосило горіх і сів дерева. Так полетіло швиденько щось. І все, а там купа диму було багато.
Я чула, щось летіло таке. Я звідки знала, що телевізор дитина дивилась.
So obviously not a very good time for anybody involved there. But that is just one part of a very, very large amount of missile strikes. A massive missile strike actually occurred across the country of Ukraine on the 29th. And this was followed up by roughly 16 different Shahed 136 and 131 Iranian kamikaze drones, which were also launched, all of them being shot down very late last night, early this morning. This is another, once again, very large missile strike. In total, suspected 69 separate missiles were launched, mostly Caliber cruise missiles, as well as the KH-101s and S-300 missiles were fired at Ukraine. Out of that, roughly 50 or so are actually shot down. So 54 in total. So very large number of shoot downs. Of course, the point of launching so many missiles is not the fact that most of them will reach their target. In fact, it is expected that most of them will not. The point of launching these strikes in such a massive wave style attack is actually you're looking at what trying to overload the friendly air defenses here inside of Ukraine, and trying to get at least a few of these to their target, whereas otherwise they'd just be easily shot down. In total, according to Amin Dzepper, who is the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, missile strikes on the capital of Kyiv resulted in 3 people being injured, and including a 14-year-old girl. Going from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs tonight, several different posts regarding this. And you see so far they are reporting 54 out of 69 missiles to have been shot down. And tonight's thumbnail here is from one of those missile strikes. You can see it absolutely annihilated a car. In this sector of the street. Once again, coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Coming from the Ukrainian Air Force. We see the remnants of one of those downed drones here. Once again, coming from the Ukrainian Air Force. Amin Dzepper posting these. Once again, several photos of the destruction there in Kyiv. First responders were quickly on the scene of most of these locations. It's not the only Igla, Strelas, and Stingers used to engage many of these. We see Ukrainian troops, as these were incoming, we can see where many of them were pulling out man-pad launchers, and we're actually downing quite a few of these missiles with shoulder-mounted rockets. So pretty cool to see these missiles going and getting shot down with some man-pads. Always, definitely, probably a very big morale boost to the troops that are currently conducting these operations.
Проходить ракета. Пуск ПЗРК відбувся. Зараз наблюдаю. Є враження цілі, ракета падає. 100% упала ракета.
From the Ministry of Internal Affairs, you can see once again more destruction caused by some of these weapon systems. These carry very significant payloads, and so they cause quite a bit of destruction once they actually impact something. Their main target for most of this stuff was critical civilian infrastructure, meaning things like energy stations that is trying to keep the capital as well as large parts of the country without power as we roll here into the New Year's and into really the dead of the winter, the dead center of the Ukrainian winter before we get into some of the coldest parts of the year. Now, as we get ready to move into a little bit lighter news, of course, every single night we get our Army Commander Conscriptovich coming to us thanks to Nuclear. He says tonight, quote, "Don't worry, we planned for this operation to take so long. Everything is going according to plan." Army Commander Conscriptovich. He originally came to us as Private Conscriptovich back in July when the initial rounds of the conscription were actually ongoing. But with this lighter news, I say it's lighter, but it is something big coming from Alexei Reznikov. Alexei Reznikov is the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and he posted a video for New Year's that wasn't addressing the people of Ukraine, but rather addressing those in Russia. And he says quite a number of things. We have added it here. We will not watch the entirety of the video as it is over 8 minutes long. But he is talking to the Russian people, and he says, as you sit down with your families, over the New Year's, as you sit down with your friends and family and are with your children and enjoying this kind of festive period of time, remember, according to our reports that we're receiving, Russia is going to close down the borders in about a week. And so you have about a week left if you plan on fleeing. And this won't just be in Russia, but Belarus as well. They're also stating that they're going to be tightening down the martial law orders, which are actually already in place across most of Russia. Just certain areas are much more strict than others, such as the Belgorod Oblast and other areas along the border region. And he stated that while it's a time to reflect on what's important and whether or not you believe him, if fighting in this war, possibly becoming maimed or being killed, if it's in your personal interest to do so, do you personally believe that this is what you should do? And at the end of the day, the decision, while a little bit more long-winded, comes down to one of two things, and that is to either surrender or die. Coming from the Ministry of Defense, the message by Alexei Reznikov.
Меня зовут Алексей Резников. Я министр обороны Украины. Накануне Нового года я обращаюсь к гражданам России, которые являются военнообязанными. В первую очередь это касается жителей крупных российских городов. Я точно знаю, что у вас осталась примерно 1 неделя, пока еще есть хоть какой-то выбор. В начале января российские власти закроют границы для мужчин, затем объявят военное положение и начнут очередную волну мобилизации. Границы тоже будут закрыты и в Беларуси. Сегодня вы думаете, чем украсить праздничный стол и строите свои планы. Но за боем курантов вы можете не услышать стук в дверь. Это постучит военком. Особенно в городах, потому что в глубинке и так уже забрали многих. Об этом вряд ли скажут ваши руководители в новогодних обращениях. Поэтому внимательно послушайте то, что скажу вам я. Я не призываю вас верить мне на слово. Я хочу, чтобы вы задали себе всего один вопрос. И честно на него ответили. Когда вы отправитесь на войну, где можете погибнуть или стать калекой на всю оставшуюся жизнь, за что конкретно вы будете воевать? Лично вы.
And so once again, this goes on for 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes here. So we're not going to be watching the entirety of it, but that is generally the gist. And so as we move on here, we immediately move down here into the south, and we move into the southeast here into the Donbass, where over here in the Luhansk Oblast, while we have no official updates, once again coming from Serhiy Haidai, who is the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, we are getting some photos, some videos from Ukrainian forces there along the front lines, and it's showing quite significant difficulties. While Ukraine has announced that they have moved an additional 2.5 kilometers toward the key city of Kreminna, we are not. It is a very slow advance. The woods around Kreminna themselves are currently embattled very heavily, with neither side making any headway. While in the open terrain, really the climate right now is being very difficult to maneuver troops. We see tanks getting bogged down, getting stuck in the very thick Rasputitsa mud, and the Russians are actually putting up a relatively stiff resistance around the city of Kreminna. So it's making it very difficult for Ukrainian forces pretty much every step of the way. So while they're making gains in and around the city of Kreminna, it is very slow. And that goes for up by Svetove as well, and other parts of the Luhansk Oblast where Ukraine is currently conducting the offensives. And we can take a look here. This is some of those Ukrainian tanks I was talking about. You can see how they're getting stuck in the Rasputitsa mud and how they're trying to do some recoveries here to try and link them together, pull them out. As they're pulling vehicles along. You see the very thick mud. It's covered everything. And you can see just how difficult that is, how deep those treads are going into that earth, as it's very difficult to get any traction with them. And tanks and any vehicles really become very easily stuck in this Rasputitsa mud. We've seen them drifting, we've seen them go off the road, we've seen all sorts of things happen, and it's even difficult to cross many of these fields on foot just because of how thick that mud truly is. Once again, that stiff resistance also being pushed out right now. We can see here, we can see some of that kind of destruction on Ukrainian forces here. This is somewhere in the Luhansk Oblast, suspected to be around Crimea. This is a Ukrainian ammunition truck. So we have to understand this is a war, and it is going both ways. For those that don't know or haven't already noticed, there is a bias for Ukraine on this channel, and it's very clearly stated. After what we've seen here on the channel from many of our sources, of which you see about 10 to 25% of every single night, we just cannot support Russia in any way, shape, or form in this endeavor. So to be very upfront about a bias here that we have, that is it. But we can see here where Ukrainian forces have suffered losses to logistical capacity as this ammunition truck has been destroyed. Unfortunately, does this have copyright music to it? You can see those artillery shells just littered all over the road, having gone off. Those look to be 152 millimeter artillery shells as well. So that is the updates coming from Luhansk, and now we can move down into the south here as we move over here to the city of Soledar. Soledar is still considered to be contested from our sources. We have not seen any shifts in the frontline space around the city of Soledar. Soledar currently rests to the north of Bakhmut. This is the area where because this is where he is, or where Ukrainian forces are trying to hold Russian troops back to the north. Soledar has been contested for some time, going on several months now, and Russian forces currently hold the eastern sector of the city, the more rural areas, while Ukrainian troops hold the much more urbanized western half of the city, with very bitter fighting going on both sides, very close combat in many of these areas. Seems to be a little bit more quiet over the last 48 hours than normal, but we do know the city is still contested, but it is still primarily held by Ukrainian troops. But the shelling has taken a very heavy toll, as it has on this entire sector of this 23-mile-long front here. And so it is pretty, it's pretty much destroyed. It's pretty much been leveled directly off the map. So some footage coming in from Soledar here today.
Это вот, блядь, місто Солідар, ёбаний в рот. В принципе, везде так. Это вот, блядь.
You can see just the utter destruction of the buildings around here. That's not the only locations. Over here in the city of Donetsk, of course, we get our daily Donetsk update. On December the 29th, the number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 1 killed, end quote. That comes from Pavel Krylenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, and he does put out these updates at 8 a.m. every single morning local time. And we can see that person ended up being killed in the city of Bakhmut itself. So far, as we have seen throughout the duration of the war, we start looking at it where at this point, since the 24th of February, we have seen 1,282 Ukrainian citizens having been killed and 2,799 having been injured. And that does not include occupied territories. That only includes liberated areas of Ukraine, those areas in Ukrainian control. So that does not include Volnovakha. It does not include Donetsk. It does not include Mariupol, where we know, tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 civilians may have been killed based off of the analysis of satellite footage of mass graves in and around that area. So quite substantial casualties. This is where the heaviest fighting, the heaviest amount of bloodshed have been taking place. And more of that bloodshed occurring here in Kostanivka, where Kostanivka was once again shelled by Russian forces. They landed in the former boarding school, the former cinema, and the courtyard of one of the dormitories on a part of the city of Donetsk. of the city of Kostanivka. One person was injured as a result of the shelling. Once again, coming from Pavlo Korolenko. We can see some of the damage here. You can see that was from the shell actually landing there in the courtyard. These buildings are being used to house people that have no way of properly evacuating, mostly internally displaced peoples right now. That boarding school is not operating as a school at this point. It's using to house internally displaced people. And just across the border, once again, in the Luhansk Oblast, we see it's HIMARS o'clock in the city of Alchevsk. Ukrainian HIMARS, as well as other precision weapon systems, conducted long-range strikes against a Russian barracks there in the city of Alchevsk, located behind the lines and in very firmly occupied territory of the Russians. Now, Alchevsk, we've already known and we've seen several times before where the city has been struck, as it's used very heavily as a staging point for Russian troops. We've seen it used very heavily as a logistical hub for Russian forces, and we have also seen where it's been used very heavily for command and control. This time, these HIMARS ended up striking a reported Russian barracks here. You get some footage coming from a local camera there in Alchevsk, coming out from about 1:30 this morning local time. We can see the destruction from it, or as the sun rose this morning, you can see Russian forces outside of that building. You can see where those strikes punched a hole right through the roofs of these complexes here and right into those buildings. We do not know the number of casualties, of course. That's not something that Russia is ever going to be releasing anytime soon. Now, the HIMARS is an extremely accurate weapon system. We know that at this point, these things are... we can see that these things are accurate within 1 meter of their intended target. Meaning you'll put a telephone-sized missile between me and the camera I'm using to talk to you. Move over here into the city of Kherson as we begin to wrap up the night inside of the country of Ukraine. Russian forces are continuing to shell this city of Kherson as well as the surrounding Kherson region. Russian artillery continues to shell these, and these are very highly populated areas as well, which they're using the Grad system. The BM-21 Grad, which stands for Hail in Russian, is a MLRS system, but it's not like the HIMARS. The Grad system fires 40-round salvos of 122mm Katyusha rockets. These rockets are unguided and carry a decent amount of explosive ordnance. These are the same type of design. It's just been modernized to an extent. These are originally developed and heavily used in places like the Battle of Stalingrad, which is the bloodiest battle ever fought in human history. And these munitions, they're meant to saturate an area. These are meant to be used to saturate an area with as much explosive power as possible, which means these are not discriminate weapons. These are not precision weaponry to any extent. Even with a area of fault, as we've seen with even other Russian weapon systems themselves, little Western weapon systems, which have been designed for precision due to the ongoing war on terror and the limitation of civilian casualties because of that. But we see even when it comes to Russian Russian weapon systems, these are not very accurate. These are not intended for accuracy. They're intended to put as much firepower in a general area as physically possible. And as such, because they're not discriminate, they are actually a war crime. So we can see here So we can see here where this actually violates the Additional Protocol 1, which was adopted in 1977 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. I think now is so I'm seeing some pretty nasty stuff in the chat as I'm going through here on the news, which might be why I seem a little bit kind of probably not on the A game tonight. So I would like to address this now, and I've addressed this a couple times before. Yeah, keep a lot of nasty stuff out of the chat. I'm seeing several things being tossed around here. Yeah, do not go back and forth with my moderators. I have them on the team for a reason. Secondly, we have very clearly stated our views here on the channel and what we are willing to talk about, what we're not willing to talk about, and where we keep things. Politics, for one, we keep that on our Discord in a separate channel from everything else, because while we are dealing with geopolitics, domestic politics, especially American politics, is not something that we very much want to touch on, as that is very much a very touchy subject, and we're not trying to... we have very clearly stated a bias for Ukraine. We're trying to remain unbiased and apolitical on many other topics. That being said, if you are going to be hateful or try to throw things around, this is still a private platform, and that means that I will not allow for certain things to be said in my chat. And I fully encourage and I will fully support my mods' decisions to do so, even if that means that I do lose viewers. So if you have anything that you wish to say, please do it in a polite manner. And please do not just use slurs and different things in the chat. I would really appreciate that. I do not find it professional. And if it does continue after you have been told, then we will just remove you. And with that, I return to the news, where we can take a look at some of this footage. This is coming from the National Police of Ukraine, and this is some of the footage of those rocket attacks here throughout the Kherson region. And you can see these are not military targets. These are, of course, civilian residential infrastructure. Now, highly concentrated civilian areas for indiscriminate strikes does not just include people. In fact, it includes infrastructure. Infrastructure meaning, according to the Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, meaning that stuff is things like residential buildings, places like hospitals, which are already protected very heavily under a multitude of conventions going clear back to the 1899 conventions. And also places of worship, civilian infrastructure that is used in order to going and being used primarily for civilian purposes, which is why striking things such as the energy infrastructure, primary usage of the energy infrastructure, especially around the city of Kharkiv, is not for military purpose, but is to support the large civilian population there, which therefore also makes that a war crime. But using indiscriminate weapon systems such as the Grad system, as we can see here, striking residential buildings, is a war crime in and of itself. It is an incident, and every single step of that is a war crime. Both the planning to use it, the carrying out of the order, the actual firing of the weapon system itself, all of those are war crimes, and all of those are punishable by international law. Going onward from that, it can escalate even further. We've seen these tactics used not just in, of course, in Kherson, and not just recently. The city of Bakhmut, the city of Soledar, the city of Bakhmutsky, the city of Aptin. We've seen it in, we saw it in Kharkiv. We've seen it in Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Mariupol. This means that it is not an isolated incident. These are not individuals who are going around. These are not just bad eggs inside of the system. It means that this is systematic. This is a tactic. This is being used purposefully, widespread, meaning is systematic. And when something, according to the 1993 Rome Statute, when something becomes systematic, according to the definition provided there in the 1993 Rome Statute and by the International Criminal Court, it becomes a crime against humanity, which means, which also means those crimes against humanity do not include just the systematic war crimes, but also ethnic cleansing, which we can say for sure has been ongoing inside of the country of Ukraine, as well as genocide, which by definition we have also been able to clearly state that it is ongoing inside of the country of Ukraine, based off of the evidence that we have already seen here in the public eye, let alone the multitudes more, which is not being published or has not been recorded on video or photo, or has been released in statements. Thousands and thousands and thousands of photos and documents going through to both the international courts as well as to the UN Commission of Inquiry. But that is everything inside of the country of Ukraine, but that does not mean that is everything that is going on around Ukraine and everything that's happening with the country itself. We jump up immediately as we move into the international news into just across the Ukrainian border, and this is in Ainanava, which is a city. It's a border city here in the country of Belarus, and Belarus is reportedly claiming that a S-300 missile landed in a field near Ainanava here in Belarus. Now, so it's a very close. Belarus is actually when I say a close ally is an understatement. Belarus is actually still in a union with the Russians. In fact, the Belarus and Russia are trying to and have not really made any headway doing so, but are trying to unify into one single country. And currently they hold a union together. It has entire levels of government. Most of that is headed by Lukashenko, who obviously hasn't worked on it a whole lot. But tensions are continuing to mount between these two countries already. We see a large military buildup of Russian and mostly Belarusian forces along the Ukrainian border put onto a military standby, meaning they are ready to go when the order is given. Very similar to what we saw right before the invasion of Ukraine itself back in February. And right now, Belarus was, of course, used as a staging point and as a point to begin the invasion itself. And so right now, because of the buildup, there's currently talks about whether or not Belarus may enter the war with the Russians, and if that means that there will be a renewed offensive in the north, considering the failures that Russia is facing in the Donbass. And it's very unclear, but it's a possibility that because of the S-300 landing, Belarus could, not successfully on the international level, but it would give Belarus what they're looking for, or give Russia that point of as a provocation, to make this into a provocation to have Belarus join into the conflict. An excuse, if nothing else. So what we have seen before is this has happened before. We've seen two so far. A suspected Ukrainian S-300 missile actually has landed in both Moldova and Poland previous to this. Both were declared an accident after investigations by those nations, by both the Moldovan government as well as Poland. And both incidents were caused by Ukrainian air defenses attempting to shoot down incoming Russian ballistic and cruise missiles, some of which had passed over the neighboring countries' airspaces, to include Moldova, which the missile actually was flying over Moldovan airspace in the Transnistria region when Ukraine attempted to shoot at it, and the S-300 ended up landing there in Moldova. So these countries have chalked that up to an accident. It wouldn't be the first time this has happened. In fact, it was a surprise that it didn't happen sooner. And when it comes to when this first occurred in the country of Poland. We do have some photos being released from that, reportedly a Ukrainian S-300 having landed there in Belarus. That allows us to push over to Russia, where we have several updates. Coming from Russia's official Twitter for the whole country, Russia is currently celebrating the Soviet Union. So, Russia is currently celebrating the 100th anniversary of the creation of the Soviet Union, or the USSR, touting victories such as major human rights and labor freedoms milestones, which I'll get into here in a moment because this is going to spark a rant. Victory in World War II, decolonization assistance, and the first human into space. About one of those they can cling to. The rest of them, not alone at the very least, if not at all. So for those that don't know a whole lot, I was born not during the time of the Soviet Union, but the immediate afterwards. I was born in the late 90s. So I wasn't around to see the Soviet Union. But so far from everything I have learned, which is quite an extensive amount, there is a lot there, the Soviet Union was a major player in World War II. There is no doubt about that. The Soviet Union fought, once again, the bloodiest battle fought during World War II, the Battle of Stalingrad, which is actually currently now called the city of Volgograd, because it sits on the Volga River. Over 1 million combatants died during that single engagement. It's the bloodiest engagement in human history. 20 conservative figures have the Soviet Union as having over 27 million fatalities during the war. Very liberal estimates go up as high as 80 million casualties, as no one actually knows the official casualties for the Russian side during World War II. And we've seen, they played a major part. They were one of the 3 major allies. However, Russia and the Soviet Union as a whole didn't do that on their own. In fact, the Soviet Union, under the Ribbentrop Pact, with the Nazi Germany, actually started World War II in 1939 with the invasion of Poland. Specifically, the Russians taking over, you would guess it, the parts of Ukraine, which at the time were parts of Poland, such as Lviv. Splitting the country between both Nazi Germany and the Soviets. And they would go on to win the war but even Stalin admitted it was not possible without the Lend-Lease Act, which provided mostly raw materials to the Soviet Union, as well as a very hefty supply of GM, General Motors, supply trucks, logistical vehicles, which is something that we've seen Russia struggle with since. Not only this, the human rights and labor's freedoms milestones. The USSR was a complete dictatorship. In fact, it was so bad at times that the Soviet Union had to undo many things. Once again, the city of Stalingrad is no longer called Stalingrad. It's called Volgograd. And Volgograd was renamed because Stalingrad had the name of Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was so ruthless as a dictator. Not only did he allow millions of people to starve, mostly in the second and third republics of the Soviet Union, but not only this, he was so bad to Russians as well that they literally had a period of de-Stalinization, is what it is currently coined as, a period of de-Stalinization. Millions of people died. Millions of people were sent to the gulags, very famous, brutal prisons, many of which were political prisoners. In fact, he let his own son die. So, to say human rights and labor freedoms milestones would be a very, very, very poor thing to do. Decolonization assistance was something else that they said. Decolonization assistance. The first thing the Soviet Union did upon relieving many of the, or liberating many of the territories that were formerly other countries, before Nazi Germany took over, they immediately turned them into Soviet republics. The Soviet doctrine, especially under Lenin and Stalin, was aggressive expansion and destabilization efforts in other countries throughout the world. If you look at how and what the Soviets were attempting to do in many parts of the world, you look at mostly, coercive. They did a lot of subterfuge, and they did a lot of things to destabilize countries throughout the world. Immediately following the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918-1919, you also see, in 1917-1918, you also see where they attempted to immediately, as the Bolsheviks go into power, attempted to start a very similar event inside of France. So they immediately formed that into the Eastern Bloc. As you can see, most of the Eastern Bloc did not it was bad enough that they didn't want to even stick around and were forced to at gunpoint with brutal suppressions throughout the entire rest of the 20th century. And the only thing that they really have any true claim to is the first human into space. And if you think I'm kidding about any of this, this is from the official Russia Twitter. I pulled these from the official Russia Twitter. Major human rights and labor freedom milestones, victory in World War II, decolonization assistance, and the first human in space. Many great accomplishments of humanity were achieved under its banner. And Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, stated in an interview, which was posted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, that, quote, "We are at war with the collective West led by the United States, which is a nuclear power," end quote. No Russian nor NATO forces have entered into direct conflict. I think that should be first thing noted. So there's a nice bit of that interview for you. So continues. This war was declared years ago after the coup in Ukraine, which was orchestrated by the United States and supported by the EU. So if you don't know how the Maidan Revolution, which occurred in 2014, it started by reckless spending on the part of oligarchs inside of Russia or inside of Ukraine, which was at the time pro-Russian. And then an immense call inside of Ukraine to join the EU and NATO, which then sparked, of course, the invasion of Ukraine and the seizure of Crimea by Russian forces, not wearing any official insignias. Therefore, that is also a war crime under international law, which is why it's also not recognized by the international community. So, if it's a direct conflict, this is not something new. Russia's been stating that they've been fighting NATO for quite some time now. There's been absolutely no direct contact between NATO forces and Russian forces throughout the entirety of the war. There have been absolutely no combat troops from either side entering into a direct conflict at any point in the last 10 months. In fact, everyone, and I saw this talked about earlier, how much money has been spent on the war, especially coming from the United States. The reality is that the United States has $4 trillion budgets. I've said it before and I'll say it again. $100 billion, $1 billion, $1 million even, is a lot of money to me and you as a viewer. Generally speaking, we probably live, in different poverty lines, but I'm going to guess and say nobody here is probably a millionaire. And if you are, please share. But the reality is it's not a lot of money for governments. Governments are not talking in the hundreds or thousands. They're talking in the millions at the very least, in billions, if not trillions at the most. The U.S. budget on annually is about $4 trillion, which is an impossible amount of money to fathom. People turn their heads when the Powerball hits $1 billion. So when you talk about money in the context of for you and me, yeah, it's a lot of money. If you talk about it for a government, especially the largest economy in the world, in the largest economies of the world, you talk about the largest financial industrial countries in the world, it's not really a lot. It really isn't. So it's very easy to misconstrue that. It seems like it's a lot, but it's not. In fact, in a lot of security packages, I could safely say, we've spent, X amount of whatever, but I factored it up, and we've spent like less than 1% of the entire, in the last 2 years, when it comes to Ukraine, we have spent, when it comes to the entire assistance to Ukraine, we have spent roughly 1 year, or less than 1% of the entire, I think it's like 0.7% of the entire budget of the United States on Ukraine, with including humanitarian aid, security assistance, training, deployment rotations, pay expenditures for deployments to Ukraine to train Ukrainian forces prior to the invasion since 2014. Angles Air Base. Man, we gotta love Angles. Angles makes a fantastic target. It's a real big location. It's moderately deep inside of Russia, enough to make some people turn their heads, but it's not on the other side of the continent in Asia. And we see here, as you can see here very clearly, so this is a Tu-95, is a Russian strategic bomber, and right next to it, this is a Tu-160. These are strategic bombers. These are the nuclear-capable bombers used similar in fashion to the B-52 and the B-1 Lancer that the United States uses as their strategic bomber fleet, as well as other variants of aircraft that don't quite fit into the same category as this is the B-2 Spirit. But what we've seen is that Ukraine actually ended up striking Angles not once but twice now. And in less than 24 hours after reports of another Ukrainian drone strike on Angles Air Base, we're seeing air defenses were reportedly active over Angles Air Base once again, supposedly engaging targets over the air base. It's not known if these were active threats at the time, but that is what we're currently seeing coming out of Angles Air Base less than 24 hours after that initial report came out that they had been struck once again, with at minimum right now is what they're saying is 3 officers were killed.
Короче, сработала система ПВО, короче, что-то на нас ебанули.
So we're seeing some more activity coming out of Angles Air Base. Very interesting. I'm very curious to see if we will get some more in the future. Thank you. And so I just got asked for a fist fight. Adult consensual fist fights are totally legal. So actually that would be considered a duel, and dueling is outlawed in all 50 states as well as federally. As we move down here and into the rest of the Middle East, or as we move into the rest of the international news, we actually jump down into the Middle East, and we jump down here into the country, while it's technically in Africa, it's close enough, we put it here in Egypt, where 5 people were killed during a terrorist attack. An exchange of fire took place between Egyptian security forces and a group of terrorists near Al Salihin Mosque. 1 officer and 3 security personnel were killed in the exchange of gunfire. At least 1 attacker was killed as well. It's not known at this point who is behind the attack. You can see some of that commotion there at that security checkpoint. So it's a short video here for you guys. Continue on here and into the country of Syria, where we have several different developments coming from the Islamic State. Coming down here, this is in Palmyra in Syria. The Islamic State militants attacked a Syrian army checkpoint. This happened, of course, once again by the city of Palmyra, where a checkpoint of the 18th basically Panzer Division, Tank Division of the Syrian army was attacked. During the battle, at least 6 soldiers were killed, several more were injured. The attackers fled from the scene of the incident. While up north in the city of Deir ez-Zor, We can see where 3 buses were attacked by the Islamic State. A group of 3 buses transporting workers from the Tam oil fields in Deir ez-Zor province were attacked by the Islamic State militants. The attack reportedly killed 10 people and wounded 4 others, with the numbers likely to rise. The incident took place despite heavy security in the area. It's noteworthy that the ambush of the terrorists carried out with a Faggot ATGM, which is a Russian anti-tank guided missile system. Generally speaking, anti-tank missiles versus buses doesn't work out so well. And you can see some of the empty spent carbon fiber tubes there from the missile system itself. We move over here and into Pakistan. We move over here. This is in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan, specifically in Quram Agency, where an unknown militant killed 3 separate soldiers. A militant attack on the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa killed 3 soldiers and injured 11 others. The incident took place in the Quram district, where attackers opened fire at a border checkpoint. During the skirmish, the military managed to eliminate 2 militants. According to preliminary data, the terrorists came from the territory of Afghanistan. No one has yet taken responsibility for the attack. Those are the 3 Pakistani troops who were killed in action. This comes as tensions continue to flare up between the border regions with Pakistan and Afghanistan, with skirmishes having been broken out not just but a couple weeks ago. Down here in the border city of here in Cambodia, the Sangkod district, this is the Diamond City Casino, and at least 24 people were killed in a casino fire here at the Grand Diamond City Hotel and Casino in the Cambodian city of Phoi Phet on the border of Thailand. At least 70 people were injured as well in the blaze, and they were burned, poisoned by combustion products, or injured by jumping from the windows of the upper floors. Approximately 700 Thai citizens were rescued and sent to the hospital in Thailand. The cause of the fire remains unknown, and the Cambodian government has set up a committee to investigate. You can see just the extent of that blaze there. So quite a turn of events there in the Diamond City Hotel and Casino. South Korea also suffered from a fire where at this point a fire on a highway ended up killing 5. A large fire in South Korean expressway on Thursday killed at least 5 people and injured nearly 40 caught in heavy traffic. Media said that the fire appeared to have begun after a bus and a truck collided. But a fire official at the scene said that the cause is still being investigated. Altogether, 44 vehicles were destroyed in the fire. After seeing those images, I think we can agree it's a miracle that it was not more, thankfully. We move down here and into the continent of Africa, where we have an update coming out of Nigeria. Coming out of the Borno region of Nigeria, Boko Haram militants were killed by Nigerian forces. Boko Haram is a subsidiary group of the Islamic State. Nigerian armed forces reported a clash with Boko Haram militants in Mafe in Borno. According to them, 8 militants were killed and 1 was taken prisoner. Motorcycles, weapons, and ammunition were also seized. And to the south here in southern Nigeria, which we have been able to geolocate. In the city of Okene, in the Kogi state, a powerful explosion occurred near the palace of the king of the people of Abir Ado Ibrahim, killing 4 people. A few hours before the attack, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari was in the city, who opened several government projects. It's not known at this point who is behind the attack. And we jump over the Atlantic, and we end up here in Washington, D.C., where, coming from the White House, a $445 billion was just signed into law for Ukraine. Ukraine is now guaranteed at least an additional $45 billion in further aid. The procurement was signed into law by President Joe Biden on the 29th. The bill, H.R. 2617, outlined the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2023. This will likely be expanded upon in further actions in Congress in attempts to provide additional funds and or equipment to Ukraine. Coming from the White House's official briefing room here on their website. On Thursday, December 29th, the President signed into law the H.R. 2617, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2023, making consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2023, and providing emergency assistance to the situation in Ukraine and for other purposes. We do actually have that bill linked as well. If you guys are interested in actually reading it, there's a short summary of it here, but I highly recommend, if you want itemized everything, you actually want to read through this impressively long document and have the will to go through. This hurt my brain reading it. It is here. You can look at the entire text. Dean Schmeichel also stated, he said in his sign into ball, it sets the general budget funding for 2023 includes nearly $45 billion in aid for Ukraine to resist Russian aggression. He says that they're very thankful. Denis Schmeichel is the Prime Minister of Ukraine. General Staff of Ukraine also gave their thanks for that. And of course, the president himself also ensured that on the Twitter, on his official Twitter, that they were going to be posting about this as well. Because cover a wide variety of different topics in that budget. The Ukraine budget is not the only thing, but it is the big story for the night. But that kind of wraps up all the serious stuff, and we kind of every night that we do this, we try and wrap it up on a good note. We try to end this on something interesting or kind of cool or something a little bit uplifting after we're talking about some relatively depressing topics. And what we end up seeing is coming out of Lincoln. It's actually coming out of the University of Nebraska. And since viruses are found absolutely everywhere, it's inevitable that organisms will consume them incidentally. Researcher John DeLong at the University of Nebraska Lincoln wanted to find out if any microbes actively ate viruses, and whether such a diet could support the physiological growth of individuals and population growth of a community. To test the hypothesis, DeLong and his team collected samples of pond water, isolated different microbes, and then added large amounts of chlorovirus, a freshwater inhabitant that infects green algae. Over the next few days, the team tracked the population size of the viruses and the microbes to see if the microbes were eating the virus. And sure enough, one particular microbe seemed to be snacking on the viruses, a ciliate known as Halteria. In water samples with no other food sources of the ciliates, Halteria populations grew by about 15 times within 2 days, while chlorovirus levels dropped 100-fold. In control samples without the virus, Halteria didn't grow at all. In follow-up tests, the team tagged chlorovirus DNA with fluorescent dye and found that Halteria cells soon began to glow. This helped confirm that the Halteria were indeed consuming the virus. So they are indeed something that are going and consuming the virus. So pretty cool. See some last minute questions coming in. So a couple things here. Bookham 40 has a couple. How many Russian expats? Don't know. I don't think any in that whole fire thing there in Cambodia. He also says China buzzed the USAF or U.S. Air Force AWACS today. Close call by unsafe act. China is shook by the Pelosi visit and are mad. Probably still very mad, but close calls happen more frequently than you think between the China and the United States, and it's not nearly as heavily talked about. It's just something that happens. The fact of the matter is the United States and China are not friends. We are not friends at all. They are a near peer threat to the United States. They are an aggressive expansionist power in the Pacific, and they, even though international treaties and laws and committees and everything else have said you can't put islands and build bases in the middle of the South China Sea and the Sea of Japan, they have decided they wanted to do so anyway and will continue to do so and are very aggressive about covering them. And they continue to kind of probe different forces, the Japanese, the Philippines especially, who have just stopped trying to hail Chinese fishing ships inside their waters and just started to sink them instead, just right off the bat. Taiwan, of course, gets probed constantly, but we also see, American aircraft too. For those who don't know what an AWACS is, an AWACS is a giant. If you've ever seen Independence Day, for example, the giant jet that has a big radar dome on the top of it, that is an AWACS aircraft. There's different variants. They don't necessarily have to have the dome, but the point of it is to basically give bigger eyes and ears to other aircraft and other assets in an area. Very frequently, I track on Flight Radar 24 where AWACS aircraft are in the Black Sea here in international waters and are flying and covering things and able to go and look at Sevastopol and Russian forces on the move. Something else Book of 40 asks is Bradleys. Are they tanks? They are not tanks. Bradleys are not tanks. So Bradley comes in two variants. It comes in the M2. And the M2 Bradley is capable of carrying, and they have very similar specs, do not get me wrong. But the M2 Bradley, M2, M3 Bradleys, the M2 is an infantry fighting vehicle, while the M3 is meant to be an infantry fighting. It's an infantry fighting vehicle, but it's trying to harken more back to its infantry carrying role, which is why it's titled in the United States arsenal as being the cavalry. It's a cavalry scout. It is meant to go forward and carry troops and conduct scouting and reconnaissance missions, which is already what the Bradley did. But at the end of the day, this classification, the Bradley is an infantry fighting vehicle. It has a very large profile, very thin armor, but it is very effective and can do many things. It carries a 20mm chain gun on it. Very effective at putting hate and discontent downrange. Very big round. Not a fun time for anyone involved. And then it also, to engage harder targets, such as, say, tanks and what have you, that a 20mm just doesn't do the trick for. It has 2 TOW missiles on a side-mounted box launcher, which will definitely kill a tank. In fact, we sent many of them. We sent the M41A7 Sabre system, fires TOW missiles as well, to Ukraine, and we've seen them be very effective in combat. So it's not a tank. It's an infantry fighting vehicle. It can carry troops in the back. It carries about 6 or 7 fully armed troops, as well as the main gun. Tracks armor gun equals tanks. No, not quite. He says Bradley is a tank. I'm kidding. It's an IFE. It is an IFE. One of the definitions of a tank, and I'll actually pull it up for you guys. So, for those that don't know, I have the Book of Knowledge, and I have maintained, as you can't see because I have a bunch of stuff blocking it, that entire bottom shelf is nothing but manuals. This is the Book of Knowledge, as has become known on here. In the Marine Corps, every single thing you get is just called a knowledge. Why? Because it gives you knowledge. But this is what I received when I went through infantry training, specifically for my anti-tank missileman's course. And this has lots of armor identification and a lot of specs and stuff I can go through and I can take a look at Because this stuff is actually unclassified and is not labeled FOU, meaning it doesn't have to just be for official use only. It's stuff that is unclassified and that I can share publicly, and it has a lot of information that is already in the public space. So one of the first things it does before you even get to learn about different types of armor and identifying them, it tells you a lot about similarities in tanks versus non-tanks and what have you. So one of the cool things is I can actually go through here and tell you what the characteristics of a tank are. So that way you can kind of identify one yourself. So if I can find it here for you. There you go. So according to the Marine Corps, a tank is a heavily armored vehicle up to the equivalent of 1,000 millimeters of armor, mounting a large caliber cannon, 90 millimeter or above, and a large, fully enclosed, heavily armored turret. It must have tracks. It is an excellent cross-country mobility, armor protection, firepower, and capability of producing a shock effect on the threat. A tank is an offensive weapon designed to fire and maneuver and assault through an objective. Remember, all tanks are armored vehicles. Not all armored vehicles are tanks. So that is the official definition from the Marine Corps. Whereas an infantry fighting vehicle, such as the Bradley, is defined as a thinly armored vehicle, about 25 to 50 millimeters of armor, and has tracks or wheels. It mounts a machine gun, medium caliber cannon, and anti-tank guided missile systems, or any combination of the three. It is designed to protect the crew and infantry passengers from small arms fire and ballistic fragments. Its mission is to take the threat from point A to point B, and does directly participate in the assault on an objective. It can also keep pace with assaulting tanks or turret center. Whereas APCs do not directly support the infantry. So the reason this is being brought up is because the United States announced that they were going to be, they were in discussions of possibly sending the M2, M3 Bradley to Ukraine in an unspecified quantity, but that they were looking at doing it. And Book of 40 asked, do you think the U.S. will follow through with the news today of them thinking about supplying Bradleys? And I do. I do believe that might be something that we would follow through with. And I definitely think it would probably be the M2 more so than the M3 variants, but I wouldn't be surprised at both. The Bradley is a really good vehicle. And it's very capable as a system, but it is getting older. And it is a system that, while it's been heavily modernized and has done a lot of good and continues to see very heavy usage from American forces, we are looking at other much more beneficial designs. And you can see where the gap between an APC and an infantry fighting vehicle really has closed. And there's not really a whole lot of distinction. They're being used very interchangeably, even though that the roles are very distinct. And that's because they can be now. At the time, you had infantry fighting vehicles, but you had APCs because the M113 really wasn't mounting anything heavy. When that design came out at the beginning of the Vietnam War, the infantry fighting vehicles, they were the M113. I mean, it doesn't really have a lot of firepower to it. It's mounting a 50 cal for self-defense, and that's about it, or whatever else you can mount to the top of it. Whereas you look at things like the Stryker, or you look at the LAV-25, or you look at any, even the AAV with its abominably thin armor, horrendous rating as an amphibious assault vehicle now. You look at many other designs throughout the world, the Warrior, the Bradley, the, you name it, you got it, the BTR series, especially the larger cannon, the BTR-82As and stuff like that. They're really they're blurred. The line is blurred between the two, and so it's kind of being phased out. The purposeful ones are being phased out, and the design of the Bradley is aging with it. And we've seen the Strykers, especially with their more The Strykers come in multiple different types of packages and stuff. They fill the infantry fighting vehicle role for the Army, who's the one who utilizes the Bradley anyway. So it also comes with better sensor suites. We saw where a new version of the Stryker is coming out that has a lot of different upgrades. The same thing, the Stryker, I think it was, the Stryker X was coming out at the same time. It wasn't nearly as advertised as the Abram X, but the Stryker X, same. It was produced and is being produced and is being designed in the exact same. It's being done in parallel with the Abrams X to meet future requirements for the U.S. Army and the U.S. Armed Forces. So there's a lot of things that have changed, and it's a capable system. It would definitely fit for the war in Ukraine. It would be very capable. It would be an upgrade from a lot of what they have now, which is mostly Soviet equipment, and I definitely think it's worth it. But it does, that would, and I would say, safely say, because the replacements are not there for the Bradley yet, they just not in the quantity, they aren't there yet. I would think it would be a limited quantity, but it would definitely be one of those things that it would be one of those things that would actually degrade combat effect or combat readiness for U.S. forces. So that is probably part of the discussion there, is how many could we actually give before we start really hurting ourselves in the event that we end up needing to use them, because the threat always looms. So I hope that answers your questions. Yes, the Bradley optics are much more superior to Russian optics. But I hope that answers your questions. I hope that you had a fantastic night. I hope that you guys found this stuff knowledgeable. Maybe not good, but I hope that you found it knowledgeable. I apologize for the interruptions tonight and seeming just trying to watch that chat and try and keep things nice in there. We don't want nasty things being said, because there's no need for it. So I hope that you guys remain safe. I hope that you and your families remain safe as always. And I hope that you guys are able to relax and celebrate the new year with friends and family in a nice warm place with great, fantastic food. Try not to deprive yourselves of too much sleep staying up if you're going to be watching that ball drop on New Year's in New York. And I hope that you guys are going to have an awesome finish for this year. It's been a privilege and an honor to be able to host the New News since we started early this March, and to run it all the way now through to clear up until 2023. We hope to keep this going for a very long time into the future. So hopefully we will see you back next year. Of course, I have to make the joke and that will be on Wednesday of next year, next week, really. On January the 4th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. We'll be covering everything that happened as the year has wrapped up and the very early parts of the new year. So, Happy New Year's, everybody. My name is Paul from the New News, and I hope that everyone has a fantastic night, a fantastic weekend, and a wonderful holiday. See you next Wednesday. Bye.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до повноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас слать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до повноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям плечом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. я до волноваги, чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює працюєте. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Після я до волноваги, чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює працюєте. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Після я до волноваги, чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює працюєте. Ідіть нахуй.